David Daniels' office was a sanctuary of order amidst the chaos of corporate life. As the head of project management at a bustling tech firm, his desk was a testament to his meticulous nature: neat stacks of files, color-coded folders, and an array of pins arranged by size. A large window behind his desk overlooked the cityscape, offering a glimpse of the world outside, but David rarely had time to admire it. His day was a continuous cycle of meetings, emails, and deadlines. This Tuesday morning was no different. David was engrossed in a report, his mind focused on the task at hand. The rhythmic tapping of keyboards and the soft murmur of conversations created a familiar background noise. Occasionally, he glanced at a framed photo on his desk, a family portrait from a vacation years ago, before everything changed. His thoughts wandered briefly to Susan, his wife, and their children, Alex and Abigail. It had been months since he discovered Susan's affair with Jason Miller, a man he once considered a friend. The betrayal still stung, but David had buried his emotions under a mountain of work. Suddenly, the tranquility of the office was shattered. The sight of two uniformed police officers striding purposefully towards his desk pulled David from his thoughts. A hush fell over the office as curious eyes followed their path. "Mr. Daniels?" one officer asked, his voice firm. David looked up, confusion etching his features. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" "You're under arrest for the murder of Kenneth Alliston," the officer stated, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The words hit David like a freight train. "What? There must be some mistake." "I haven't." His protest was cut short as the cold steel closed around his wrists. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the officer continued, his tone unwavering. David's heart pounded in his chest. The murmurs in the office grew louder, and he could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, their gazes heavy with shock and curiosity. He was led away, his mind reeling. As the police car sped through the city, David's thoughts raced. Memories flooded back, Susan laughing at a joke, their children playing in the yard, the moment he discovered the incriminating text messages on her phone. He had confronted her, and she had confessed, but he never thought it would lead to this. The accusation was absurd. He had been at work the entire time. The police station was a stark contrast to his office. The sterile, fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare, and the cold, gray walls seemed to close in on him. He was processed, fingerprinted, and then thrown into a small, intimidating cell. The metal bars felt like a physical manifestation of his despair. Alone in the cell, David struggled to make sense of the situation. His mind oscillated between disbelief and rage. He thought about his children and the impact this would have on them. How could he prove his innocence when everything seemed so bleak? Hours later, he was allowed a phone call. With trembling hands, he dialed his home number. Alex answered, his voice shaky. "Dad, are you okay?" Alex's voice was a mix of fear and confusion. "Alex, listen to me. I didn't do what they said. I need you to be strong for Abigail and yourself. We're going to get through this," David said, trying to inject as much confidence into his voice as possible. "But Dad, what happened? Why did they take you?" Abigail's voice came on the line, filled with tears. "It's a mistake, sweetheart. I promise you, it's all a big mistake. I need you both to trust me and stay strong. Can you do that for Daddy?" "Yes, Dad," they both replied, their voices unsteady but filled with determination. The emotional weight of hearing his children's voices was almost too much to bear. He fought back tears, realizing the enormity of the battle ahead. Hanging up the phone, David sat down on the cold, hard bench, steeling himself for the fight to come. He was innocent, and he would prove it. For himself and for his children, he had to. The visiting area of the police station was a bleak, sterile room designed to strip away any semblance of comfort. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting a cold, unforgiving glow on the tiled floor. The air was thick with a mix of disinfectant and despair, punctuated by the occasional murmur of other visitors. A thick, scratched plexiglass window separated the prisoners from their visitors, with a series of worn-out chairs bolted to the floor on both sides. David sat anxiously on his side of the barrier, his heart pounding. His mind raced with thoughts of his children, Alex and Abigail. He hadn't seen them since his arrest, and the uncertainty of how they were coping gnawed at him. The door to the visiting area creaked open, and his heart clenched as Alex and Abigail walked in. Alex, at 19, was tall and lean, his usually bright blue eyes now dull and shadowed with worry. His shoulders were hunched, and his normally confident stride was hesitant. Abigail, just 14, looked fragile, her face pale and eyes red from crying. She clung to Alex, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. They took their seats on the other side of the glass, and David picked up the phone, his hand trembling. Seeing them like this, so vulnerable and hurt, was almost too much to bear. "Dad," Alex began, his voice cracking slightly, "are you okay?" David forced a reassuring smile, though it felt hollow. "I'm holding up, son. How are you two managing?" Abigail wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "We're scared, Dad. We don't understand what's happening. Why did they take you?" David took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. "It's a misunderstanding, sweetheart. I'm innocent, and we're going to prove it. I need you both to be strong for me." Alex's eyes flickered with anger and determination. "Dad, there's something we need to tell you. It's about Mom." David's heart skipped a beat. "What about her?" Abigail looked down, tears streaming down her face. "Mom packed her things and went on Jason Uncle's place in this morning. And yesterday, she called him. She said she got rid of you and that you can't bother them anymore." David's world tilted on its axis. He stared at his children, disbelief mingling with a burgeoning rage. "What? Are you sure?" Alex nodded, his jaw set in a hard line. "We heard her, Dad. She planned this. She set you up. Kenneth is her another lover. We saw some couple photos in her phone." David's mind reeled. Susan, his wife of 23 years, had not only betrayed him with another man, but had also conspired to ruin his life. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have ever imagined. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Inside, a storm of emotions raged, shock, disbelief, and a seething anger that threatened to consume him. How could she do this? To their children? He looked at Alex and Abigail, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty, and felt a surge of protective fury. He couldn't let Susan get away with this. "Listen to me," David said, his voice low and steady. "I promise you, I will make this right. I'm going to prove my innocence, and when I do, I'm going to make sure your mother pays for what she's done. But right now, I need you both to stay strong and trust me." Abigail's lip quivered, but she nodded. "We trust you, Dad." Alex's eyes burned with a fierce resolve. "We'll do whatever it takes, Dad. We're with you." David felt a surge of determination. He had to clear his name not just for himself, but for his children. They needed him to be strong, to fight back against the injustice that had torn their family apart. The thought of Susan and her lover laughing at his downfall fueled his resolve. As he hung up the phone and watched his children leave, he felt a cold, steely determination settle over him. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. This was about justice. Susan and Jason had taken everything from him, and he would make sure they paid dearly for their betrayal. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but David was prepared to walk it, no matter the cost. The battle had only just begun. David's lawyer, Rebecca Hughes, was a tenacious figure with a reputation for fighting tooth and nail for her clients. A seasoned defense attorney in her early 40s, Rebecca had sharp features softened only by her piercing blue eyes, which seemed to miss nothing. She had taken on David's case with a fierce determination, convinced of his innocence from their first meeting. Rebecca's strategy was meticulous. She started by dismantling the prosecution's case piece by piece. In the dimly lit courtroom, she cross-examined witnesses with surgical precision, exposing inconsistencies and planting seeds of doubt. She subpoenaed records, dug through phone logs, and scoured security footage. Every new piece of evidence added to the tension that hung over the courtroom like a dark cloud. David sat through each session, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched Rebecca in action, her confidence and skill a beacon of hope amidst his despair. But the moments between breakthroughs were agonizing. The prosecution's relentless attacks, the whispers of doubt, and the oppressive weight of his fellow inmates' judgments gnawed at him. One particularly tense moment came when Rebecca unveiled a crucial piece of evidence: security footage from David's office on the day of Kenneth's murder. The footage showed David working at his desk, the timestamp aligning perfectly with the time of the crime. The courtroom held its breath as the video played, the silence palpable. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he reviewed the evidence. The tension was unbearable, the outcome uncertain. Then, finally, the judge spoke, his voice breaking the silence like a hammer. Given the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Daniels was not present at the scene of the crime. The charges against him are hereby dismissed. David's heart soared. The gavel struck, signaling his release. Relief washed over him, mingling with the bitterness of what he had endured. The humiliation, the fear, and the betrayal, these were scars that would not heal easily. As he stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight blinding after weeks in confinement, he saw Alex and Abigail waiting. Alex's face was a mix of joy and lingering anger, while Abigail's eyes brimmed with tears of relief. They rushed to him, their embraces warm and desperate. "Dad, you're free," Alex said, his voice choked with emotion. Abigail clung to him, her small frame shaking. "We knew you didn't do it, Dad. We never stopped believing in you." David hugged them tightly, feeling the strength of their love and the weight of their shared trauma. "We're together now," he whispered. "Nothing will tear us apart again." Yet, even in this moment of reunion, David's mind was already churning with thoughts of the future. Susan and Jason had orchestrated his downfall, and they had to be held accountable. As they walked away from the courthouse, David's resolve hardened. He would not let this injustice stand. That night, as he lay in his bed for the first time in weeks, David began to plan. He reached out to old friends, contacts he could trust, and started gathering information. He wanted to know everything about Susan's and Jason's lives since his imprisonment. Every detail could be a weapon in his quest for justice. He set up a makeshift command center in his basement, cluttered with maps, documents, and photographs. He tracked their movements, their interactions, and their vulnerabilities. It was a meticulous, consuming task, but David was fueled by a cold, burning need for retribution. Days turned into weeks as David prepared. He trained his body and mind, pushing himself to the limits. His focus never wavered, each step calculated. He would strike not just with force but with precision, ensuring that Susan and Jason felt the full weight of their betrayal. As he stood in the basement, surrounded by the tools of his vengeance, David looked at the photo of his family taken years ago, before the lies and the pain. He made a silent vow to himself and to his children. He would restore their lives, no matter what it took. The battle for his freedom was over, but the war for justice had just begun. David's basement had transformed into a hub of strategic operations. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and notes, all connected by lines of red string. It was a meticulous visual representation of his plan to dismantle the lives of Susan and Jason, piece by piece. The cold, calculated determination that had taken root in his heart was palpable in every corner of the room. David spent countless hours observing Jason's routines. Through a combination of discreet surveillance and information gathered from old acquaintances, he learned that Jason was a creature of habit. Every morning, he left his upscale apartment at precisely 7:30 a.m., grabbing coffee from the same cafe before heading to work. Lunch was always at a nearby bistro, and his evenings were either spent at the gym or entertaining clients. David noted every detail, every potential vulnerability. Susan, on the other hand, was more unpredictable. She had taken a leave of absence from her job, likely to manage the fallout from David's wrongful arrest. Her days were spent at Jason's home or in the company of friends who had no idea of her betrayal. David analyzed her habits, focusing on her emotional patterns and weaknesses. She had always been meticulous with her finances, and David saw an opportunity to exploit this. David began gathering the tools and methods necessary for his plan. He purchased a small drone equipped with a camera, allowing him to surveil Jason's apartment from a safe distance. He acquired a set of lockpicking tools, studying their use with precision. Burner phones, prepaid credit cards, and various disguises were added to his growing arsenal. the sense of anticipation built with each passing day, fueling his resolve. In the midst of his preparations, David reconnected with old friends and colleagues. He visited Peter, a former army buddy who now worked as a private investigator. Over a beer at Peter's dimly lit office, David explained his situation, carefully omitting the darker aspects of his plan. "Peter, I need your help. I need information on 2 people, everything you can find. Can you do that for me?" David asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his desperation. Peter leaned back, studying David's face. "I can do that, but what's going on, David? This isn't just about proving your innocence, is it?" David hesitated, the weight of his conflicting feelings pressing down on him. "Let's just say I need to make sure they can't hurt anyone else the way they hurt me and my kids." Peter nodded slowly. "I'll get you what you need. Just be careful, all right?" As David left Peter's office, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He knew he was walking a fine line between justice and revenge. His internal monologue reflected his struggle. He remembered the love he once had for Susan, the woman who had shared his life for 2 decades, and the friendship he had with Jason, now tainted by betrayal. Could he go through with his plan and still live with himself? Would this quest for vengeance consume him entirely? David's nights were restless, filled with dreams of his family and the life they once had. He often woke up in a cold sweat, torn between his desire for retribution and the moral implications of his actions. He questioned whether his pursuit of revenge would truly bring peace, or if it would only deepen the wounds. Yet, every time he saw the pain in Alex's and Abigail's eyes, his resolve hardened. He couldn't allow Susan and Jason to escape the consequences of their actions. They had taken everything from him, and now it was his turn to dismantle their lives. David stood in the shadows, a cold determination in his eyes as he watched Jason's pristine BMW parked in the underground garage. It was the first step in his plan, a subtle disruption to shake their confidence. He approached the car, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. With practiced precision, he slashed the tires and smashed the side mirror with a crowbar, then quickly retreated into the darkness. The sound of the alarm echoed through the garage, a siren heralding the beginning of their downfall. The next morning, Jason stood by his vandalized car, fury etched across his face. He kicked the deflated tire, swearing under his breath. Susan arrived shortly after, her face pale with anxiety. Who would do this? Jason fumed. I haven't wronged anyone. Susan's eyes darted nervously. Maybe it's just random vandalism. We should call the police. The police arrived, but the report yielded no immediate leads. Jason's frustration grew as he struggled to find an answer. Meanwhile, David watched from a distance, satisfaction mingling with the cold resolve that drove him forward. The next phase targeted Susan's meticulously managed finances. David had acquired enough information to gain access to her accounts. Late at night, in the glow of his computer screen, he initiated transfers that would siphon off significant sums of money into untraceable accounts. He also set up automatic payments for exorbitant luxury items, ensuring a paper trail that would leave Susan floundering. The following days saw Susan on the phone with her bank, her voice rising in panic. What do you mean all my accounts are empty? This has to be a mistake. Her usually composed demeanor crumbled as she realized the extent of the financial ruin. David's surveillance revealed their growing paranoia. He listened to their conversations, their frantic attempts to piece together what was happening. Jason's confident facade began to crack, and Susan's anxiety spiraled into desperation. This isn't random, Susan, Jason said, pacing their living room. Someone's targeting us. Susan buried her face in her hands. But who? And why? David felt a grim satisfaction as he observed their turmoil. But the real test was yet to come. He needed to escalate his actions, to plant evidence that would lead them to destroy each other. Breaking into Jason's apartment was a calculated risk. Dressed in dark clothing and gloves, David picked the lock with the skill he had acquired during his meticulous preparation. Once inside, he moved silently, careful not to disturb anything that would betray his presence. In Jason's study, David found the perfect spot to plant his fabricated evidence. He inserted a USB drive into Jason's computer, uploading files that linked him to illicit activities. David crafted emails that suggested Jason was planning to embezzle funds from his company, adding a layer of believability by mimicking Jason's writing style. The emails detailed meetings with shady contacts, complete with dates and times. David's heart pounded in his chest as he worked, the tension almost unbearable. He double-checked every step, ensuring no fingerprints or DNA were left behind. The risk was immense, but the potential reward drove him forward. Leaving Jason's apartment undetected, David felt a surge of adrenaline. The trap was set, and now it was only a matter of time. He watched from a distance as Jason discovered the emails, his face contorting in disbelief and fear. Jason's first call was to his lawyer, his voice trembling as he tried to explain the incriminating evidence. Susan's reaction was equally volatile. She confronted Jason, her voice sharp with accusation. "What are you hiding, Jason? I found those emails. Are you planning to leave me bankrupt while you run off with our money?" Jason's face twisted in anger and confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about. Someone is framing me." Their arguments grew louder and more frequent, each accusation driving a wedge deeper between them. David watched as their trust eroded, replaced by suspicion and resentment. The life they had built together crumbled before his eyes, a slow, agonizing destruction. David knew the endgame was approaching. The careful planning, the calculated risks, it was all leading to this moment. As he watched Jason and Susan unravel, he felt a cold sense of satisfaction. His revenge was unfolding perfectly, and they would pay for every ounce of suffering they had caused him. The final act was yet to come, and David was ready to see it through to the bitter end. David stood in the shadows of the dilapidated house, a place long abandoned and forgotten by the world. The broken windows and peeling paint added an air of decay and desolation, matching the turmoil within him. He had chosen this location carefully, a place where his final confrontation with Susan could unfold without interruption. Every detail was meticulously planned, but the weight of what he was about to do bore down on him heavily. In the days leading up to this moment, David's emotions had been a chaotic storm. His anticipation was tempered by a gnawing sense of unease. He had rehearsed the confrontation in his mind countless times, yet the reality of it was far more complex. He wanted justice, retribution, but a part of him still grappled with the love he once felt for Susan, the memories of their life together. As he sat up inside the decrepit house, his thoughts drifted to Alex and Abigail. They were his anchor, the reason he had to see this through. Susan's betrayal had torn their family apart, and this confrontation was as much for them as it was for him. He checked his watch. Susan would arrive soon, lured by a cryptic message he had sent from a burner phone. She would think it was Jason, summoning her for a desperate, clandestine meeting. The sound of a car approaching broke the silence. David's heart pounded in his chest as he moved to the shadows, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Susan stepped out of the car, her movements hesitant. The fear in her eyes was palpable, a stark contrast to the confidence she once exuded. She pushed open the creaking door, stepping into the dark, foreboding interior. "Jason?" Her voice was shaky, uncertain. "Jason, are you here?" David emerged from the shadows, his expression a mask of controlled rage. "No, Susan. It's me." Susan's eyes widened in shock and fear. "David, what are you doing here?" David took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. "I think you know exactly why I'm here." The room seemed to close in around them, the oppressive silence broken only by their tense breaths. Susan backed away, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape. "Please, David," she pleaded. "You have to understand, it wasn't supposed to be like this." David's eyes narrowed, his anger barely contained. "You set me up, Susan. You and Jason. You destroyed our family." Tears streamed down Susan's face as she shook her head. "It wasn't my idea, David. Jason convinced me. I never wanted you to go to prison." David laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that? After everything you've done?" As they stood in the dim light, memories flooded David's mind. Flashbacks of their life together played out like a cruel montage, laughing with their children, celebrating anniversaries, sharing quiet moments. Each memory was a knife to his heart, a reminder of the love that had turned to ashes. "I loved you, Susan," David said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you with everything, and you betrayed me." Susan sobbed, sinking to her knees. "I'm sorry, David. I made a terrible mistake. I was weak. But please, think of the kids. They need us." David's face hardened. "You should have thought of them before you decided to destroy our lives." The weight of her actions seemed to crush Susan. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The psychological impact of her betrayal, now fully realized, broke her spirit. David watched her, his own heart a battlefield of emotions. The satisfaction of seeing her suffer was tainted by a profound sorrow. This was not the woman he had loved, but a stranger who had caused him unimaginable pain. David felt a hollow victory as he stood over her. He had achieved his goal, yet the cost was higher than he had anticipated. The moral struggle within him raged on. He had sought revenge, but the reality was far more complex. The destruction of Susan brought no real solace, only a deeper understanding of his own brokenness. As he left the dilapidated house, the echo of Susan's sobs lingered in his mind. He knew this was not the end, but a painful chapter in his journey. The road to healing and justice was still long, but he walked it with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to rebuild his life and protect his children from the shadows of the past. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of Susan's trial. The judge's stern voice cut through the silence as he delivered the sentence. 10 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud and wrongful imprisonment. Susan stood there, her once confident demeanor shattered, eyes downcast as she was led away in handcuffs. The legal system had caught up with her, and justice, though delayed, was finally served. For Jason, the fallout was swift and devastating. The embezzlement scandal erupted like a firestorm, engulfing his career and personal life. The evidence David had planted was airtight, and Jason found himself cornered with no way out. His once pristine reputation lay in tatters as he faced charges of grand larceny and corporate fraud. His assets were seized, his accounts frozen, and he was left with nothing but the wreckage of his ambitions. David watched from a distance as the two people who had betrayed him faced the consequences of their actions. There was a sense of grim satisfaction in seeing justice served, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the damage they had caused could never be fully undone. The scars ran deep, and the process of rebuilding his life and family would be long and arduous. Returning home, David focused on mending the broken pieces of his life. Alex and Abigail were his top priority. The trauma of the past year had left them wounded, but they were resilient. Together, they began to navigate the complex path of healing. David spent more time with them, engaging in activities that brought joy and a sense of normalcy back into their lives. He took them camping, played board games, and attended their school events, ensuring they felt his unwavering support and love. Alex, now a teenager, struggled with anger and betrayal. David made it a point to have open conversations with him, allowing him to express his feelings without judgment. They often spent evenings talking on the porch, the cool night air carrying away some of the heaviness. Abigail, still young, sought comfort in her father's presence. David read her bedtime stories, tucked her in every night, and held her close when nightmares threatened her sleep. The community around them played a crucial role in their recovery. Old friends who had distanced themselves during the turmoil began to reappear, offering support and solidarity. Peter, the private investigator who had helped David gather evidence, became a steadfast ally. His no-nonsense attitude and practical advice were invaluable as David navigated the complexities of his new life. David also reconnected with Rachel, a childhood friend who had moved back to town. Rachel was a beacon of light in the darkness, her compassion and empathy helping to heal wounds that seemed insurmountable. She became a constant presence in their lives, her warmth and kindness providing much-needed solace. Slowly, a new bond formed, one built on mutual respect and understanding. Through these interactions, David found himself changing. The bitterness that had once consumed him began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious hope. He reflected on the events that had transpired, understanding that while trust had been shattered, it could be rebuilt with time and effort. He learned to let go of the anger, embracing forgiveness not for Susan and Jason, but for his own peace of mind. Family bonding became the cornerstone of their healing. They established new traditions, weekly movie nights, Sunday brunches, and spontaneous road trips. Each shared experience strengthened their relationship, weaving a tapestry of love and resilience. The laughter returned, slowly at first, but with increasing frequency. Moments of joy, once fleeting, became lasting memories. One evening, as the sun set over their backyard, David watched Alex and Abigail playing with Rachel's dog, their laughter ringing out in the twilight. He felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had faced unimaginable trials, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. Years later, the auditorium buzzed with excitement as families and friends gathered to celebrate the graduating class. David sat in the front row, his heart swelling with pride as he watched Alex step onto the stage. Clad in his cap and gown, Alex exuded confidence and determination. The past few years had been arduous, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. The principal's voice echoed through the hall. Alex Carter, summa cum laude. Alex received his diploma to a thunderous applause. David stood, clapping and cheering, tears of pride in his eyes. The journey to this moment had been fraught with challenges, but Alex's resilience and hard work had paid off. As Alex descended the stage, he met David's eyes, and they shared a knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of their shared triumph. Later, at the family gathering, laughter and joy filled the air. Friends and family mingled, celebrating not just Alex's achievement, but the strength of their unity. David's heart warmed as he saw Abigail chatting animatedly about her latest project. Abigail had found her passion in graphic design, her creativity flourishing as she turned her dreams into reality. She had recently been recognized with a prestigious award, a testament to her talent and dedication. "Dad, come join us," Abigail called, her eyes sparkling with happiness. David walked over, feeling the deep satisfaction of a father who had seen his children overcome adversity and thrive. He wrapped an arm around Alex and Abigail, the three of them sharing a moment of pure joy and love. As the evening wound down, David found a quiet corner to reflect. The years of turmoil and revenge felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the peace and contentment of their new life. He thought about the journey they had been on, the betrayal, the quest for justice, and the arduous path to healing. He realized that while revenge had given him a sense of immediate satisfaction, it was the process of rebuilding that had truly brought peace to his heart. David's thoughts wandered to the lessons he had learned. He had sought justice for the wrongs done to him, but in the end, it was forgiveness and love that had healed his soul. He understood now that redemption came not from vengeance, but from the ability to move forward and create a life filled with purpose and joy. Rachel approached, a gentle smile on her face. She had been a rock, her support unwavering through the darkest times. David took her hand, grateful for her presence in their lives. "You look deep in thought," she said, her eyes reflecting her understanding. David smiled. "Just thinking about how far we've come. I never imagined we'd find this kind of peace." Rachel squeezed his hand. "You've done an incredible job, David. You and the kids deserve all the happiness in the world." The future held a sense of promise. David had plans to expand his consultancy business, using his experiences to help others navigate their own challenges. He wanted to give back to the community that had supported them, to be a source of strength and guidance for those in need. Alex was heading off to college with ambitions of his own, determined to make a difference in the world. Abigail's career was just beginning to bloom, her talent opening doors to exciting opportunities. As the family gathered for a final toast, David raised his glass. "To new beginnings and endless possibilities. We've been through so much, but we've come out stronger. Here's to a future filled with love, happiness, and the strength to face whatever comes our way." The glasses clinked, and the room filled with cheers and laughter. David looked around, his heart full. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were now symbols of their resilience and courage. The new beginning was not just a fresh start, but a continuation of their journey, one that held the promise of growth and endless potential. David knew there would be challenges ahead. Life was never without them. But with the strength of their family and the lessons they had learned, they were ready to face the future with hope and determination. The road ahead was open, and together, they would walk it, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next.